potential diseases of the future. That type of research is incredibly risky, so much so it was banned for a time by the US government under the Obama administration. But what we now know is Dr. Anthony Fauci, the so-called hero of the pandemic himself, is the chief US government. So much so, he worked within the Trump administration to overturn that ban while nobody was looking in 2017. We now also know with certainty the U.S. government, under Fauci, funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan itself. In short, it's not about blaming China. If anything, if coronavirus did leak from a lab, it is the biggest indictment of the public health establishment in America, that we knowingly have been funding dangerous research in places with substandards. Fauci, the hero of the pandemic, was intimately involved in funding and perpetuating the research that very likely is what caused this entire thing in the first place. And the cover-up here really is stunning. I'm sure all of you are again wondering why you need to listen to a guy on YouTube. But the real reason is one that we all know. The reason the media didn't do any of this is because Trump said it was real back in March. And look, he didn't do it because he knew it was for certain. He did it because he wanted to avoid blame. But just to avoid giving him a $1.2 billion scheme known as the Global Virome Project, which is a, quote, 10-year collaborative scientific initiative to discover unknown zoonotic viral threats and stop future pandemics. In other words, it's a search for a whole host of new unknown viruses. Who will do the investigation into whether any of this is safe? Will Congress come to its senses and say, hell no, we're not allowing that here? And if the U.S. government or U.S. taxpayers are trying to fund it, then maybe we should ban round two. And we only hope that the next one is not as bad as this one was. It's a pretty stunning piece, Crystal, that you first of all have to read Nicholas Wade in the Bureau of Atomic Scientists. Excuse me, multi-thousand word piece. Once again, he goes through the
research are escaping the lab. It happens every year. So the idea that this came from a lab is not crazy or improbable at all, because documented other viruses escape the lab, again, almost see that it is, and is ultimately shut down. So they closed ranks. Media just accepted it, not only because they just were sort of like deferential to the scientists, trust the science,
that was
but also that was part of it. The other part of it was Trump out there saying, oh, that's not what we're talking about here at all. But that's part of why they immediately shut this down. And just the investigation of what actually happened became this weird partisan issue.
Yeah, and even now it's partisan, which is that right now only Republicans are the ones who are talking about it. Why? Because
no doubt the talk of this neighborhood for a long time. However, it's important to note that owning a tiger within the city of
compound. This is one of the most sensitive sites in Jerusalem. In the past few minutes, these pictures have come into us here at the BBC. This is a fire that's taken place outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's unclear how it started.
And I mean, the point is about these confrontations that have been taking place at the Haram al-Sharif there, as it's known to Muslims, Temple Mount, as is known to Jews, is that you know, there's quite a lot of stuff flying around in the air, not least started. But obviously, you know, anything. And we saw earlier in the day pictures emerging from inside the mosque itself of confrontations appearing to really enter the building. And, you know, those images are here because for Palestinians and for Muslims, for the third holiest shrine in Islam, that is something that is shocking for them to see. And I think that's why there had been these international calls for calm ahead of what was always going to be a very, very tense and very serious escalation between militants in Gaza and Israel, with the rockets fired towards Jerusalem, an incredibly rare, very unusual event, that with air raid sirens going off in Jerusalem, and then these airstrikes by the Israelis and the Palestinian.
Unrest began early on Monday ahead of a planned Jewish nationalist march, and over 300 Palestinians have been injured since. Let me show you some of the videos that have come in through the day. First of all, this is the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. For over an hour, they in turn threw stones and other objects. This footage was released by Israeli police. These are Israeli security officers during one confrontation. They say thousands of police firing tear gas, and we see one wounded man being carried away. We're told 20 police officers were injured, so that is what was happening outside the mosque. And then this was inside. Well, you can hear the chanting inside, but also the confrontation taking place outside. Some videos on social media show stun grenade canisters landing inside the mosque. Then this broken pieces of glass scattered across the mosque. We also have seen pictures of a burnt carpet and a burnt Quran. The Palestinian Red Crescent says 228 Palestinians have been taken to hospital for treatment and that 7 are
extremely high tensions. Things and confrontations were already starting. As I came beneath the walls of the Dome of the Rock here, heavily armed Israeli border police had entered the compound. They were firing volleys of stun grenades at Palestinian mosque itself. And over a period, I would say, of 2 to 3 hours, there were then continued clashes. The Israeli border police were trying to push the Palestinians out of the compound, and they did at various points. People were congregating around lines through the Muslim graveyards here, away from that.
Well, that was inside the old city. There were clashes outside the old city walls too. This video was posted by Israel's foreign ministry showing the moment an Israeli driver struck a Palestinian under attack. The Al-Aqsa Mosque compound sits inside the old city of Jerusalem. It's sacred to both Jews and Muslims and has been a frequent flashpoint between Palestinians and Israelis. It's located, as Tom was showing us, on a hilltop complex, Haram al-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary. It's the third holiest site in Islam, and it's home to the Dome of the Rock. That's where many Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. For Jews, this is known as Temple Mount, and it's regarded as the holiest site location of the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall as it's called. Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called these events today a battle between tolerance and intolerance, between lawless violence and order. He goes on, elements that create our rights periodically force us to stand strong, like Israel's police officers are doing. While Palestinians strongly disagree with that description, here's their Prime Minister.
I hold the fully responsible for what the worshippers are exposed to in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I warn of the consequences that will result from such incursions, as well as the attempts to evacuate the original owners of the land from their homes.
Well, tensions were building ahead of a rally by Jewish nationalists at 4 p.m. local time. Organisers cancelled it, though some gathered anyway. Here are Jewish nationalists carrying flags outside the old city. Palestinians who claim East Jerusalem as their capital of a future state see the anniversary in Gaza. It's said to be in response to this. This is BBC footage showing smoke from rockets fired towards Israel. Hamas, which is the Palestinian group which controls Jerusalem, and this was the damage. Let's hear from the BBC's Tom Bateman again.
We're at Damascus Gate. It's one of the entrances to the Muslim quarter of the old city. It had been reasonably or relatively calm given the events of earlier in the day as we were here. And from the Gaza Strip, the Israeli army has confirmed that sirens have been going off in various parts of the country, also outside the Gaza Strip. And as that happened, Palestinians were celebrating as those sirens went off. You can see now the water cannon moving down the street here, just firing, if we can move the camera there, towards Palestinians. If you look over to the left here, you'll see people running away. This is skunk water. It's a foul-smelling liquid that is fired, moving in, trying to push people back.
Now, this escalation has not come out of the blue. The past few days have seen the heaviest clashes in Jerusalem for years. There are 2 events that are the focus of this. This was the Sheikh Jarrah have been staging protests against legal efforts by Jewish settler groups to evict them from their homes. The lawsuit, which dates back to 1972, argues that the land belongs to the ancestors of Jewish settlers. Palestinians, though, see this as a well, Israel's Prime Minister denies a heavy-handed response to these protests. This is what he said on Sunday.
We shall not allow any radical element to undermine the calm in Jerusalem. We shall decisively and not allow violent riots.
Well, Palestinians deny those charges. There are other factors to consider here too. Let's hear from the BBC's Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen.
The conflict is there, it's a given. Mr. Netanyahu managed. The one that was a threat to Israel was Iran. So the thing is, though, is that the conflict bubbles on. And in that conflict, Jerusalem is the sharpest part of it all. As you've just heard, it happened, of course, in Ramadan as well, which for Muslims is a highly significant part of the year. So put all together, those sparks were enough to reignite things again. The question now is whether both sides, or whether this thing will escalate.
Well, both the US and the European Union are calling for calm. Here's the EU's foreign policy chief.
The situation with regard to the evictions of Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah.
There is not just kind of one single cause here. There have been multiple issues that have been playing in and converging together into really, one day today that was always going to be this big question about the degree to which tensions would escalate. I've done. Now, I think in terms of looking ahead and the potential for things to be calmed, I mean, first of all is what is at the very, very core of the conflict so often, and particularly now, and that is that incredibly sensitive holy site. Idly, the way the conflict has erupted and spilled out to some of the theatres we so often see around the Gaza Strip. Now, that's going to be a challenge for everyone involved, and I think, the coming hours are going to be really critical to see how the risk or not things can calm more quickly.
Tom, thanks for your help on this story right through the day.
2 years before the filing. The paper citing people familiar with the matter and documents it reviewed. NBC asked about his meetings and relationship with Epstein at one of the paper's forums.
I made a mistake in judgment that I thought there.
Last week, the Gates shocked the world with news of their broken marriage. In just January, Melinda spoke with Savannah
to role model that in our house for our children.
Melinda filing for divorce shortly after the announcement last week.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Find your favorite recipes, celebrity interviews, uplifting stories.
It's the terrifying moment.
And I literally saw all of my best friends in my rocks.
Aerial footage shows the aftermath, exclusively with Inside Edition, of her telling railing earlier in the party before it collapsed.
But